Hello all, my name is Mikael Brygger and I will introduce and moderate the plenary session for the techno-writing strand. I ask everyone to keep their microphones muted during the presentation in order to avoid the Zoom anomalies. After the presentation, there will be time for questions and comments. Please ask for the floor by stating your visible name in the chat. What kind of literature will robots be reading in their spare time in the not so distant future? A future that is taking place on Earth or on Mars, or perhaps inside a living bacterium. Who will be reading what just before and after the lights go out and the sun explodes? How to navigate and extend the final frontiers of writing and reading. Dear participants of CARPA 7, it gives me a great honor to present an internationally renowned poet, Dr. Christian Buck, a visual artist, scientist, co-founder of the contemporary conceptual writing movement, a writer of 3 books of poetry. Crystallography is a pataphysical encyclopedia that was nominated for the Gerald Lampert Memorial Award. Eunoia, a work of European experimental literature, a best-selling poetry book of all time in Canada, and the winner of the Griffin Prize for Poetic Excellence. His ongoing project, Xenotext, includes inventing a durable archive of storing a poem inside a living bacterium that constitutes a usable machine for writing a poem in response. Xenotext extends the horizon of writership, readership, and thinkership over a lifetime of a single human, current Anthropocene, and even the humanity itself, encouraging debates about the future of science and poetics. The 3rd book of poetry by our keynote speaker is titled Book 1 of the Xenotext. Marjorie Perloff, it is an infernal grimoire that introduces readers to the conceptual groundwork for this project. The book offers a primer in genetics, even as it revisits the pastoral heritage of poetry, updating the Orphic idyls of Virgil for a new age of mythic danger, be it the beauty of artful biogenesis, if not in the terror of global extinction. Book has also created artificial languages for 2 television shows and accolades for his virtuoso performances of sound poetry, and his conceptual artworks have been exhibited in several galleries. Dear participants, I end my introduction by quoting Christian. I joke that I don't write poetry. I make anti-gravity machines out of words. Please welcome Dr. Christian Buck.
Welcome, everyone. I'm grateful to be here to address you today about a topic in conceptualism, the literary movement that I have helped to found with other poets, including the likes of Kenneth Goldsmith and Derek Beaulieu. This presentation is entitled A Zoom Lens for the Future of the Text. This presentation consists of 4 chapters, the first of which is entitled The Microcosm of Conceptualism. 1. Conceptualists have distinguished themselves as poets in part because they explore what I call the limit cases of writing, taking an interest in the most marginal extremes of expression. Some of us, for example, have investigated the limit cases of scale in poetics, composing poems not only as puny as molecules of sugar at the atomistic scale of our DNA, but also as vast as databases of email at the archivist scale of the NSA. Even though scale as a value has received only the merest notice in the history of poetics, I believe that a sense of scale, be it in degree, in volume, in length, remains crucial to us if we wish to understand the fundamental perspective of poets, who must often adopt a position with respect to their own unit of composition, a unit that, whatever its scale, must act like an atom, recopied and adjoined to make a text. 2. Consider, for example, the following whimsical speculation about scale, knowing that if marked on paper and if viewed from an extreme vantage of distance, the period at the far end of this sentence might constitute a point of 0 dimension. But as I magnify this dot of punctuation, the period soon becomes a circle with 2 dimensions. And as I magnify the period even further, zooming into it, I see that the circle becomes a planar fabric of linear fibers, each of which from afar has 1 dimension. And as I magnify each strand further, I see that eventually it becomes a tubule with 3 dimensions, leading me to conclude that the period at the far end of this sentence might in fact occupy a diverse variety of dimensions, each of which contradicts the others depending upon the scale at which I might prefer to observe such a tiny mark after this last word. 3. Heidi Nielsen, in Typography of the Period from 2003, has in fact magnified periods from 26 different typefaces, blowing up each of these atoms of punctuation by 3,000% in order to examine their shapes more closely. Among the samples studied by Nielsen, only the periods from typefaces like Avenir, Gilsons, Palatino, and Times New Roman look like perfect circles, whereas the periods from typefaces like Arial, Helvetica, Lithos, and Verdana look like squarish polygons. The diverse designs for these silhouettes of edgy daubs and oval blots might seem surprising, given the presumable simplicity of the shape for such punctuation. And yet, the reader encounters a plethora of forms, not unlike spores of pollen. Her project reminds me of microdots used by spies to convey stolen, covert documents miniaturized to the size of a period. 4. Emanuel Goldberg in 1925 actually perfects the technology for making microdots, doing so by using a luminous projector that passes light through a Zeiss microscope fitted with specially corrected lenses, all mounted on an optic bench cushioned against ambient seismic vibration, with the image developed on a brass plate coated in sensitive collodion emulsion of silver chloride and citric acid. Goldberg first makes a microdot that depicts a cameo of Nicephore Niepce, the inventor of photography. But eventually Goldberg prints small text with letters, 1 micron in size, a resolution equivalent to the microscopic inscription of 50 Bibles per square inch. His techniques drive subsequent innovation in micrography, the modern limits of which include the tunneling microscope, whose scans can map the contours of a lone atom of hydrogen. 5. Don Eagler at IBM in 1989 deploys such a tunneling microscope to position 35 atoms of xenon on a plate of cooled nickel, so that by spelling out the trigram for the company, these dots of matter actually comprise the smallest artifact so far manufactured by humanity. Eagler has gone on to draw the kanji glyph for the word atom by arranging atomic pixels of iron on a sheet of cooled copper, Moreover, he has arrayed molecules of carbon monoxide on a metal panel so as to write a waggish comment measurable in nanometers. If you can read this, you are too close. Such techniques of microscopic inscription, using the tiniest of all periods, has given IBM the power to store 1 bit of digitizable information in no more than a dozen atoms at a time, thereby increasing the possible capacity for storage of data upon the metallic surfaces of microchips. 6. Patrick Chung Wong has in turn noted that in a world of fragile media with limited space to store increasing quantities of data, the atomic domain of DNA might permit us to preserve our cultural heritage against the threat of planetary disasters, including thermonuclear warfare and astrophysical barrage. Wong has illustrated this hypothesis by encoding the lyrics to "It's a Small World After All," implanting this song as a genetic plasmid inside the chromosome of an extremophile called D. radiodurans, a germ able to survive without mutation in even the most lethal of biomes, including the vacuum of outer space. Such genetic writing shows the degree to which geneticists have now become poets in the medium of living things, storing data like microdots available for retrieval from libraries locked inside the genomes of immortal microbes. 7. Craig Venter in 2010 has used automated chemistry to create a bespoke species of synthetic bacterium, Mycoplasma laboratorium, otherwise nicknamed Cynthia, a cell bred with an artificially manufactured genome, built from scratch by a computer. Greg Venter has watermarked this genome by encoding into it a line from a portrait of the artist as a young man by James Joyce. To live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to recreate life out of life. Craig Venter has thus preserved a line of modern poetry in the first cells of an embryonic ecosystem, and his experiments have informed my own ongoing project entitled The Xenotext, in which I have created an example of living poetry by engineering a deathless bacterium so that it becomes not only a durable archive for storing a poem, but also an operant machine for writing a poem. 8. I believe that conceptualism must delve into this kind of molecular substrate for poetry, taking a cue perhaps from a poem like Fact by Craig Dworkin, who lists exhaustively all the chemicals in the very page of inked paper used to document the list itself, so that in fact, the poem Fact must vary with each instantiation, since the constituents in the brands of inked paper change from publisher to publisher. I might note that despite the myopia of critics who feel obliged to dismiss the merits of such outlandish literature, the act of addressing such atomic scales of expression nevertheless constitutes one of the outlying horizons for the future of poetry. I believe that the acuity of our vision in poetry depends in part upon our ability to zoom across a multitude of unexplored dimensions, focusing upon each of them before ever reaching the finality of a full stop. Chapter 2, to zoom from an atom to a star. Keyes-Bowick, in his essay Cosmic View from 1957, conveys the size of the cosmos via a series of scenic images, each scaled up by a power of 10 across 40 jumps in viewpoint, from a sodium nucleus at 10 to the minus 13 meters to a galaxy cluster at 10 to the 26 meters. Bowick depicts a scene situated at the scale of a Dutch child holding a cat in her lap, while seated at noon in the yard of her school in Bilthoven near Utrecht. Bowick devotes one page to each jump, zooming away from her hand past a city, past a star, past a nebula, until reaching a cosmic limit, then zooming down into her hand past a mite, a cell, a virion, until reaching an atomic limit. Boeck places the child in a mise en abîme whose levels of recursive reframing, distanced, then magnified, almost recall the Droste effect seen in the image of Dutch nurse shown at two varied scales, one nested in the other on packages of Droste cocoa. Cosmic View has in turn inspired the beautiful, haunting photoplay Cosmic Zoom, illustrated in 1967 for the National Film Board of Canada by Eva Jage, who animates the essay by Kees Boeck, zooming from the scale of a proton to the scale of a galaxy in the span of 8 minutes. Jage depicts a Canadian juvenile rowing a boat on the Ottawa River. And much like Boeck, the animator zooms away from the hand of the boy, rising into the atmosphere, passing vast spirals of stars until reaching a pancosmic perspective. Then the animator zooms down into the hand of the boy, diving into a hematocyte, passing tiny helices of atoms until reaching a subatomic perspective. Jage places the child in a mise en abîme, whose recursive reframing oscillates between two voids, two dark orbs of black space, each one like a full stop at either end of a palindrome. Cosmic View has likewise inspired the movie Powers of 10, produced in 1977 by the designers at the Eames office, all of whom animate the essay by Kees Boeck, traversing cosmic scales from 10 to the minus 6 angstroms to 10 to the 8 light years. The designers depict a couple picnicking at Burnham Park near Soldier Field in Chicago. And again, like Boeck, the designers zoom away from the hand of a man asleep, the view moving upward until reaching the very edge of all observable galaxiae. And then the designers zoom down into the hand of the man asleep, the view moving inward until reaching the very edge of all observable minutiae. The nested frames of squares demarcate, each magnitude traversed, receding or widening as the film undergoes its recursions, hinting perhaps at the Droste effect if we choose to mistake the movie itself for the dream of the sleeper at the picnic. Istvan Banyai, in his book Zoom, offers a rejoinder to all these precedents, depicting a series of images in which every view recedes from a prior view, even as our frames of reference collapse into each other. For example, we see that as the zoom proceeds from the initial vantage of a chicken being observed by children in a house, the expanding viewpoint shows this farmyard to be a model scene of toys depicted on the cover of a magazine, held in the hand of a boy, asleep on the deck of a cruise vessel, now depicted in an ad on the side of a bus, as seen upon the television of a desert cowboy, whose image appears upon the postage for a letter received by a tribesman on a remote island, overflown by an aviator whose airplane vanishes into the distance as our viewpoint recedes further into outer space, leaving our planet behind to diminish into a full stop. Each of these zooms depicts the act of recursive reframing as a kind of fall, either a falling away, as if pushed from a receding point, or a falling into, as if pulled down a swelling abyss. Each of us might undergo a sense of vertigo during this kind of zoom through the void, since we traverse boundless distances via superluminal acceleration typically forbidden by the laws of physics. With the fall of such a zoom in mind, let me display some of the conceivable dimensional limits for the minimal element of composition in poetry. For me, at least, all concepts of poetry depend upon a premise about this unit or atom, which poets must recopy and adjoin. I believe that every literary movement teaches a poet to commit to the value of a minimal element in writing. And this unit provides the standard for the scale at which any literary creation can occur. This third chapter is entitled The Minimal Element of Writing. Jacques Derrida claims that the mark constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls the irreducible atom at the asemic origin for the metaphysics of meaning itself, be this origin in the biogenetic code of life or the cybernetic code of data. The writing of the mark, the grapheme, underpins the transmission of information even before the advent of our phonetic language, for which the mark might seem to constitute the written glyph that evolves to capture an uttered sound. Each extant mark refers beyond itself to an absent mark, alluding to this absence again and again via iteration and recursion, doing so through a series of sequential references, none of which can terminate in a last mark. Each mark thus finds itself characterized by both a differing of its meaning across sites of signification and by a differing of its meaning across times of signification. Zoom out. Isidore Issu claims, however, that the letter itself constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls the fraction of the word from which everything must be revealed, i.e., the asemic pieces of words pulverized into their alphabetical constituents. Issu insists that these particles of the lettrist can revivify the abstract meanings of poetry by confronting the reader with the concreteness of such indivisible foundations for expression in the debris from the destruction of the word. Such a fixation upon the irreducibility of the letter eventually leads Issu, late in life, to formulate an imaginary aesthetic movement called ex-coordisme, a movement both extensible and coordinate, aspiring to become an art of the infinitely large and the infinitely small, an art whose concepts can transect all scales of expression, from atoms to stars. Zoom out. Charles Olson claims that the syllable constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls the smallest particle of all, situated at the place of the elements of the minims of language, these particles of sound, each like a lone note of music. Olson insists that the syllable constitutes for him the source of speech, a minimum that underpins the euphony of poetry, and consequently, he argues that if poets wish to improve their writing, they must attend to the juxtaposition of syllables rather than to the orchestration of either rhyme or meter. He argues, in effect, that lines of verse consist at first of syllables, each a point of sound, and together these lines produce a field of composition, possibly implying that a syllable constitutes a zero dimension from which the higher orders of both a one-dimensional line and a two-dimensional text might arise. Zoom out. Ferdinand de Saussure claims that despite his own dubiety about its atomic status, the word as a value nevertheless resembles the minimal element of writing, what he calls the linguistic unit, i.e., something central in the mechanism of language. Saussure suggests that even though the concrete entities of language might prove difficult to delimit, what he calls the word unit seems nevertheless to serve as the most convenient touchstone for the signifier of the signified in writing. The word, for him, offers itself easily as the most standard currency of exchange within language, since the word behaves much like the unit of a 1 franc piece, insofar as every given word denotes a value with respect to the value of every other word. The word for him thus functions as a kind of coin, a unit within a system of differences, all in reciprocal opposition to each other. Zoom out. Jean-François Lyotard claims that the phrase constitutes the minimal element of writing, the only one that is indubitable because it is immediately presupposed as the most basic of links to which a genre of both rules and goals might apply. Lyotard suggests that the phrase exists to enable an addresser to convey meanings about a referent to an addressee, although none of these rules in such a quadrivium can precede the phrase itself, since they emerge only within relation to each other at the moment when the phrase gets articulated. Each phrase follows a regimen abiding by a set of both rules and goals, but this regimen varies from phrase to phrase, such that when linked, each phrase finds itself articulated in a series of heterogeneous, if not incompatible regimens, all in dispute with each other, unable to reach steady states of signification. Zoom out. Ron Silliman claims that, on the contrary, the sentence must constitute the minimal element of writing, what he calls the unit of any literary product, such that any further subdivision would leave one with an unusable fragment. Silliman argues that because infants, when learning language, can imitate the contours of a sentence in speech long before they can parse the sentence into its subunits, the sentence is, in some sense, a primary unit of language. He suggests that the sentence is the horizon, the border between two fundamentally distinct types of integration, one grammatical and one syllogistic. The sentence acting as a hinge unit between rules of syntax and rules of reason. The sentence thus provides the standard currency of exchange across orders of meaning, converting a fund of unusable fragments into the coin of tradable arguments. Zoom out. Alexander Bain claims that the paragraph constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls a subdivision of discourse, i.e., a main unit of thought defined by its unity of purpose in a manner that recalls the rigor of the poetic stanza. Bain argues that the paragraph integrates otherwise disparate sentences, all of which must unite to develop a single thesis about a topic made prominent in the first of its sentences. Hence, the paragraph possesses a unity that does not digress from its single stated topic, but that instead elaborates upon a theme in cogent detail. I might note that because the paragraph takes on the structural properties of a small essay, complete with topical preface, logical comment, and summary closure, paragraphs in an essay partake of the Drost effect, like a fractal imitating in miniature the form of the whole of which they are a piece. Zoom out. John Trimber claims that the page constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls the unit of discourse, i.e., the fundamental feature of print culture, its structural uniformity providing a metric for the length, if not the labor, of writing itself. The page of the modern moment constitutes a kind of terra nulla, overwritten with the features of a grid, otherwise invisible, but nevertheless rule-bound by industrialized typographical norms, complete with uniform fonts in uniform lines, all arrayed in ranks on a sheet of paper, fixed in scale throughout the depth of a sheath. The page represents a measure for the text, providing countable intervals for the routine of writing, with each turn of the page leading a person not only deeper into the dimensions of the book, but also deeper into the dimensions of the self, cultivating an inwardness of escape. Zoom out. Stéphane Mallarmé claims that the book, in fact, constitutes the minimal element of writing, that when all is said and done, there is only one unwittingly attempted by whoever has written. its unity in the end encompassing the world, so as to become the Orphic explanation of the earth, i.e., all earthly existence must ultimately be contained in a book. Mallarmé imagines that such a book, in its singularity, constitutes a cosmos unto itself, and each poet can only ever hope to express a fragment of its entirety, aspiring at best to realize this book to come through the book that the poet has at hand to make. And yet, here again, I might note that we see in such a vision of bookish oneness the specter of the Droste effect. The book imitates in miniature the universe that it inhabits, making of itself a microcosm that contains a facsimile of the macrocosm. Zoom out. Eli Mendel might claim that the corpus constitutes the minimal element of writing, what he calls the life sentence, in which the whole canon of a single writer becomes the main unit for authorial discourse, i.e., a life of words or a life in words. Every work written by a poet gets absorbed eventually into such an opus, all to serve the sentence from which no poet gets out on parole. I might note that not even parole, so to speak, allows us to escape long altogether, for only the full stop of death ends such a sentence. The demise of the author, complete with any last word, leaves behind a body of work, a corpus memorialized under a name, both unique and proper, identifying the standard currency of exchange among the living, all of whom must construct for themselves the grandiose tradition of literature out of these indeed large, albeit prime, units of writing. Zoom out. Kenneth Goldsmith claims that, on the contrary, the archive constitutes the minimal element of writing, since, as he notes, the digital genesis of any textual corpora now results at once in their curated storage, with everything copied and stowed online in automated databases. Writers are plundering these vast warehouses of text, not for raw material, but rather to reshape them. Moreover, large-scale venues for online social engagement like Google, Facebook, and Instagram archive all our interactions with their platforms, collating our utterances in a manner that might rival the repositories of surveillance in servers at the National Security Agency, the NSA. Each text that we publish in an online milieu now results in the creation of a library on our behalf, whose filing system records our writing, all of it searchable by algorithms. Zoom out. George Louis Borges imagines the extreme horizon for writing, an archive for every archive, a cosmically exhaustive repository containing every conceivable permutation of the alphabet, thereby reducing all subsequent authorship to preemptive plagiarism. The Library of Babel exhausts the repertoire of language so utterly that to speak is to fall into tautologies. I might note that such a nightmare already haunts the conceptualists, who feel a nagging concern that literature might have arisen of its own accord, not from the expressed sentiments of unique authors, but from the automated procedures of formal systems, all of it a fatal order in which the act of publishing a book is equivalent to the act of unshelving a book already written so as to sign your name to its colophon. Conceptualism suggests that from the tiny scrawl of Aleph to the vast sprawl of Babel, each scale of writing fosters its own poetics about the unit or atom of composition. Disputes among poets might in fact arise, at least in part, from disagreement about what constitutes this true unit. So that, for example, both the exponents of lyricist poetry and the exponents of concrete poetry might misjudge the mutual merits of each other, largely because the former poets fixate upon the aptest word, le mot juste, as the preferred unit of expression, whereas the latter poets fixate upon the asemic mark, la signe nu, as the preferred unit of composition. I may even go so far as to aver that among all schools of writing, conceptualism has so far explored the most extreme of all units, be they as Lilliputian as small molecules or as elephantine as giant databases. Future scales of our civilization might in fact offer even more stupendous dimensions for expression, zooming out from the human scale of a handwritten memo to the godly scale of a terraformed moon. We might see the hint of such grandiosity, for example, in the epic work of an artist like Wim Delvoye, who has carved his poetry at giant sizes into mountainsides, leaving banal notes for readers everywhere within his vicinity to read from afar. Susan, out for a pizza, back in 5 minutes. George. We might find ourselves surrounded by samples of such titanic writing, whose units of composition zoom out to vastitudes that graduate from the planetal, from the sidereal, from the galactic, all the way to the infinite. And yet, like an ant that crawls over a letter carved upon a tombstone, we may in fact be too puny to read the epitaph that we inhabit. This fourth chapter is entitled The Macrocosm of Conceptualism. 1. Nikolai Kardashev has categorized civilizations based upon the amount of energy that a civilization can expend, measured in total watts over its lifetime, each type increasing its usage of power by 10 orders of magnitude above its prior stage of development. A type 1 civilization can access the energetic potential of an entire planetal system, expending 10 to the 16 watts in the course of development. A type 2 civilization can access the energetic potential of an entire sidereal system, expending 10 to the 26 watts in the course of development. And a type 3 civilization can access the energetic potential of an entire galactic system, expending 10 to the 36 watts in the course of development. A type 4 civilization might conceivably access the energetic potential of an entire cosmos, achieving a stature equivalent to the divine in its power over the physics of reality itself. 2. Type 1 Kardashev civilizations, like ours, might build megastructures large enough to cover a planet with writing for orbital readers, as allegedly proposed in 1826 by Carl Gauss, who seeks to plant wheat fields on tundras so as to convey axioms of geometry to lunar aliens. Just as Percival Lowell might have misperceived canale crisscrossing the plains of Mars, mistaking illusory channels for evidence of artificial irrigation during his telescopic monitoring of the planet, so also has Richard C. Hoagland argued that, despite evidence to the contrary from NASA, the Cydonia planitia on Mars displays evidence of intelligent inscription, including monuments and pyramids, all arranged in significant geometrical patterns. When zooming into these features with orbital cameras, however, the pareidolia of their artificiality disappears into natural geology. 3. Luke Arnold notes that type 2 Kardashev civilizations might build megastructures large enough to occlude the light from their star, producing visible shadows like trigons or louvers, detectable as writing in the transitive light curve from a luminary backdrop. Tabitha Boyajian has observed that the star KIC 8462852 is in fact undergoing such a recurrent, expanding occultation so titanic that no phenomenon in nature can readily explain the light curve of the ongoing dimming, which has persisted, dipping on one occasion by as much as 22%. Even though a cometary envelope of dust might account for some of these observations, the oddness of the anomaly has nevertheless caused some astronomers to indulge in extravagant speculation, suggesting that a Dyson swarm of tiny bots might be engulfing the star so as to capture its entire output of energy. 4. Jaron Lanier notes that type 3 Kardashev civilizations might build megastructures large enough to require the reorganization of stellar systems into written symbols, what Lanier calls graph stellations, whose inscriptions might span an entire galaxy for aeons. Joseph Voros has gone on to observe that the galaxy PGC 54559, otherwise known as Hoag's object, might constitute such an enigma, insofar as no phenomenon in nature can readily explain the formation of such a perfect annulus of stars arranged almost exclusively within the radius of habitable distances from the central radiant core. Even though a collision between two galaxies might account in part for this ring, with one galaxy passing through the other like a bullet passing through a bullseye, no putative galaxies in the region lend any support to this hypothesis, thus leading to such speculation. 5. Stephen Hutsu has noted that type 4 Kardashev civilizations might go so far as to transmit messages at cosmic scales by manipulating the parameters for the microwave background during the creation of the universe, perhaps encoding up to 100,000 bits of data in the anisotropic fluctuation of temperature across this panorama, thereby leaving behind a signature upon the structure of the macrocosm. Roari Mackenzie has observed that the CMB cold spot, coincident with the Eridanus supervoid on the Planck map of the sky, might correspond to such a signature in the microwave background, because the spot is both so gigantic and so unlikely that no phenomenon in nature can readily explain its cosmic origin, causing Mackenzie to imply that the void might in fact provide evidence for tampering by forces from a parallel universe entangled with our own. 6. Humanity has only now begun to leave its boot prints and its tread marks upon the surfaces of other planetoids, like the moon, and only recently have the Pioneer probes and the Voyager probes begun to pass beyond the heliosphere, exiting our solar system while harboring messages about our earthly culture on plaques and records, so as to address exo-civilizations above us on the Kardashev scale. We have only now begun to broadcast messages via radio waves into outer space, deliberately transmitting news of our whereabouts to Messier 13 via the Arecibo Observatory, then later sending other kinds of information into the void with abandon, including not only an advert for Doritos delivered to the star HD 95128 in the constellation of Ursa Major, but also the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, starring Keanu Reeves, delivered to the star Alpha Centauri. The xenotext participates in this legacy of exoplanetary transmission, insofar as the poem constitutes a digital payload aboard a fleet of spacecraft launched by NASA into the void. The xenotext resides, for example, in 2 microchips within the vicinity of Mars, one aboard the MAVEN probe in orbit around the planet, and one aboard the InSight probe on the Martian surface at Elysium Planitia. The xenotext also resides in 2 other microchips, one aboard the OSIRIS-REx probe visiting the asteroid 101955 Bennu, and one aboard the Hayabusa 2 probe visiting the asteroid 162173 Ryugu. The James Berg Earth Station in Carmel, California, has also beamed the xenotext to the star Gliese 526 in the constellation of Boötes, 5.5 parsecs from the Earth, doing so as part of a plan to communicate with any exo-civilization that might in fact be orbiting this red dwarf star. 8. Ultimately, conceptualism seeks to prepare poetry for such a future milieu where all scales of writing can transect each other across an enormous spectrum of dimensions, a milieu perhaps not unlike our own emergent dystopia, where a molecular substrate, like the ACE2 receptor on a lung cell, can become the site for microscopic inscription by a coronavirus, whose replication requires that every human on Earth download an app called Zoom, so that we can interact with each other while undergoing quarantine, each of us sharing recorded readings of poetry beyond this routinely atomized prism of solitude. Conceptualism zooms into the future of poetry, beyond the predicted demise of poetry, a demise upstaged in advance by other cultural concerns, more epic than any poem, even one immortalized at the puny scale of an atom or at the vast scale of the void. Thank you, one and all, for attending my presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Christian, for the extremely visionary presentation that is also important to the agenda of CARPA 7.